Welcome to the Health Stuff You Need to Know podcast. Information you need to thrive in our toxic modern world. I'm your host, Scott W. Kirkland. I hope you're ready because it is go time with the Wellness Whip. Yeah! Welcome to my very first Listener's Digest podcast. This is where I listen to 3 of my favorite health and wellness podcasts and distill that information down into one podcast and, of course, give it my own personal spin. The idea is that you get even more great information packed into a shorter amount of time because I know you're busy. The first episode I'm going to digest is from Bulletproof Radio, hosted by Dave Asrpey, and his guest is Dr. Sears. The topic is how to avoid and fix the damaging effects of diet-induced inflammation, which is actually a very important subject because the foundation of our health really is diet. It's certainly one of the pillars. And when you eat a bunch of inflammatory foods, it leads to inflammation in your body and leads to chronic disease. So, very important subject matter. Let's get into it. One of the first things that mentioned is that fat is back and that the old school dietary advice of a low-fat diet was a huge mistake and that fat has been vindicated and is back in the diet. And I totally agree with those sentiments. Fat is so important. Your brain is 60% fat. Fat is used as precursors for making hormones and a whole bunch of other body processes. Extremely important. You are fat. Your brain is fat. You got to have it. The distinction is made that there's a difference between unhealthy fat and healthy fat. So unhealthy, trans fat, of course, terrible, deep fried foods. Bad news, highly oxidized, causes heart disease. You want to avoid deep fried foods. Also want to avoid fats that are made out of vegetables, common vegetable oils like corn oil, safflower oil. These types of fats are high in omega-6s and increase inflammation in the body. The kind of fats you're looking for are avocado oil, olive oil is fantastic, and saturated fat like grass-fed butter is an excellent choice, and fat from grass-fed meats that have good ratios of omega-3s to omega-6. Now, Dr. Sears' opinion is that the number one food for brain health and for fighting inflammation in the body is wild sockeye salmon because of the excellent amount of omega-3 fats and the astaxanthin, which is a very powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory agent. That's what makes the salmon's skin color so that pinky orange color. They also talk about what is a good breakfast plan for kids because kids need a lot of brain power when they have to go off to school, and so they start their kids off with lots of fat. Dr. Sears recommends seafood, primarily wild sockeye salmon, blueberries, which is he calls a food for your brain garden. And it's been proven that blueberries are absolutely magnificent for neurogenesis or for helping your brain neurons grow. So remember, eat more blueberries. Excellent advice. Of course, you want to eat organic, and wild blueberries are a better choice. They're going to have less sugar than the highly hybridized version. Nuts are a great idea too, lots of healthy fats. And they also recommends greens. Dr. Sears also talks about our body's natural pharmacy. So within the lining of our blood vessels, called the endothelium, there are trillions of little squirt bottles. At least that's what they look like under the microscope. And these are our little pharmacy factories that produce and release all kinds of very beneficial, our natural body medicines that we need. So things like anti-clotting factors, anti-inflammatories, antidepressants, substances that lower blood pressure and cholesterol. Essentially, your body has its own pharmacy to produce the vast majority of drugs that people, like most prescription drugs that people take, are all for these kind of conditions. But your body makes its own, and it's vastly superior because there's no side effects. You know, Dr. Sears likes to make things simple for his patients, and he talks about when you eat sticky stuff, you basically cover up the medicine bottles in your blood vessels. So the sticky stuff would be like fibrinogen, homocysteine A, oxidized cholesterol, all these things that essentially when you eat crappy food, like fried food in particular, then your basically you're frying the linings of your arteries, and you're covering up your medicine balls and doing yourself a great disservice. Now, Dave and Dr. Sears both travel a lot, so they talk a bit about what they do when they're on the road. So for flights, they both recommend taking lots of antioxidants, because when you're up in the air, you're exposed to radiation because you're higher up in the atmosphere. There's less atmosphere to filter out radiation. You're also looking at bad air. People are coughing. You got germs floating around. So definitely a good idea to boost your immune system. Also, you're exposed to flame retardants. Everything's covered. And so you're looking at endocrine disruptors. For people who don't know what that is, those are chemicals that kind of mimic the body's own hormones that can screw up your hormone signaling system. Not very good. Dr. Sears cites a study about pilots that, of course, spend a lot of time in the air, and how when they increase their antioxidant levels, they fare better when exposed to the radiation. Interesting bit of information from Dave is that Starbucks, with their hot water, they have some of the very best filters available. So he'll just go and get some hot water, and he brings his own coffee and makes the coffee because it has lots of antioxidants, which is great for flying. Dr. Sears makes a statement where he says, if he was going to sum up health advice in 3 words, it would be this: avoid insulin spikes. So Dr. Sears recommends eating slowly, because when you eat a big fast meal, especially a big meal of crap, you spike all kinds of nasty things, the sticky stuff and glucose in your system, and it causes a big insulin spike, which is going to send your body into fat storage mode. So not what you want. So Dr. Sears is recommending eating slow. He has what he calls his rule of 2s. So that's eating twice as often, half as much, and chewing twice as long. This way you can avoid those dreaded spikes. Dr. Sears recommends a plant-based diet with seafood, and he recommends supplements. If you don't eat seafood, he recommends taking a Hawaiian astaxanthin supplement. And if you don't eat your 10 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, you should take a fruit and vegetable supplement. He also stresses the importance of exercise, moving the body, because when you move, it actually creates a shear force within your blood vessels that opens those medicine bottles. Now, movement also causes the body to release brain growth factor. So when you exercise, you're actually helping out your brain. Dave mentions a study where they were measuring boys and their reading skills, and that boys that exercised more had better learning outcomes. Dr. Sears mentions a study where they took a bunch of kids with ADHD and had them run around a track a half hour before school, and that made a big improvement in their learning outcomes as well. Dr. Sears goes as far to state that he believes that when they took recess out of school, that's what caused the spike in ADHD, or at least played a role in it. They didn't talk about some of their favorite exercises, and that includes dancing and ping pong, because it makes both sides of your brain work, cross back and forth, and it strengthens the corpus callosum, which is the bridge between 2 halves of the brain. So yes, very good for you. And then talk a little bit about the benefits of meditation. And Dr. Sears is a big swimmer, and he recommends that you have like a mantra, and that you time repeating that mantra in your head while you swim. So if you're swimming along, you say, I'm going to have a wonderful day today, or any number of things. The movement, repetition, and actually being in water, which is reminiscent of being in the womb, has a very powerful effect and affecting your subconscious. They talk a little bit about taking cold plunges. So that is jumping into some very cold water, or something else that you can do is take a quick, at the end of your shower, put it on cold for 30 seconds or so. And what it does is a whole bunch of things, but it releases opiates. So after you're done, you actually feel better. Of course, it's very invigorating, as you can well imagine. And it also causes the lymph system to contract. The lymph system is an integral part of your immune system, and it's this fluid that moves in the little spaces between your cells, and it's not pumped around like blood by the heart. It's moved by the movement of your body contracting and squeezing and moving things. So when you jump into cold water, all your muscles tense and freeze up, and it just gives you this pump of moving that lymph, which is quite good for you. They also talk about how nature is good for you. Getting out on a forest walk is absolutely fabulous for the body. They talk a bit more about healthy fats, omega-3s in particular. Mention an interesting fact that Eskimos have much lower rates of blood clotting because they eat so much seafood, so much fat from marine animals. They're actually more prone to nosebleeds because their blood is actually thinner, which is interesting. And Dr. Sears mentioned something that I'd never heard before. It's that the omega-3s versus omega-6, omega-3s are anti-inflammatory, whereas omega-6s are pro-inflammatory. That's pretty common knowledge. But what I learned was that the 6s, they use up the enzymes so the omega-3 fats can't get into the cells. So I found that to be pretty interesting. Dave talks a little bit about long-term veganism and there being problems, much more than just vitamin B12 deficiency, and recommending that people consume some grass-fed ghee or some pastured eggs to help combat those problems. We talk a bit more about eggs, and Dr. Sears that eggs have been exonerated because they had been demonized for so long for cholesterol, but now that cholesterol myth has been busted and eggs are healthy again, which is absolutely true. And Dave actually recommends putting eggs and blending it in with coffee, which is a little different. For those of you who don't know, Dave Asrpey is well known for popularizing Bulletproof coffee, which is essentially taking coffee, adding coconut oil, and grass-fed butter. I've tried Bulletproof coffee and I like it. And I've also added a raw egg to it as well. And I find you wouldn't even know there was an egg in it. The fat and the protein just blends up there nice and makes it nice and frothy like a latte. It's quite good actually. So I recommend giving it a try. Sometimes I have a Bulletproof coffee as a meal replacement. And so that extra protein in there and fat is very satiating. And Dr. Sears had an interesting tip. He recommended getting rid of the forks in your house and just using chopsticks because it's going to slow you down. And then you'll get filled up, satiety will kick in, and you'll eat less. Now, I like this idea because I have a tendency to wolf down my food. I just inhale it, and I end up eating too much because my body's natural satiety sensors are not. They take a bit of time, and the food is gone. I just want to eat. So I'm going to try the old chopsticks and see how that goes. And then Dr. Sears' parting advice at the end of the episode is to eat real food, meditate more, and move your body more. Dr. Sears has a new book out called The Inflammation Solution, and you can find his work at drsears.com. And Dave Asrpey has a new book out called Headstrong, and you can find his work at bulletproof.com. The next podcast I'm going to review and digest is episode 137 from the Ultimate Health Podcast, which is hosted by Dr. Jesse Chappus and Marni Wasserman. On this episode, they interview Dr. Sylvia Tara, and it's about visceral fat. There are different kinds of fat on your body, and some of them are more dangerous than others. Visceral fat is the fat that fills the spaces in between your organs, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Other kinds of fat, or the main other kind of fat, is subcutaneous, which is the fat that's under your skin, which is not really that dangerous. So let's get into it. The first thing they get into is that not all people gain weight at the same rate for the same reasons. So there's a bunch of different things. So your microbiome can play a role in how much nutrition you actually get out of your food, how much your microbiome is actually consuming. There's genetic differences. There's also gender differences as well. And there's also age differences. Dr. Tara then talks about what the role of fat is in the body. Now, most people know that it plays the role of the storage of calories for when you need it at a later date, and that's for sure, but it's so much more than that. It's also, she actually refers to it as an organ because it releases hormones into your bloodstream that affects your body. And if you don't get enough fat, you can actually impair your fertility and your brain will even be smaller. Your body wants to hold on to its fat because fat is that important, and it releases a hormone called leptin. Leptin can cause you to be hungry. It can also alter your metabolism. When you lose weight, your metabolism slows down to compensate for the weight loss. It's as though there's a penalty for losing weight. So what happens is that you lose weight, it can slowly creep back on, and then you try to lose it again, and it gets harder and harder each time. Dr. Tara talks about how women are more likely to carry more weight because they're genetically predispositioned to do so. They divert more calories to creating fat stores, as well as have more of the hormone ghrelin, which your stomach secretes, so you eat more. Turns out there's some different kinds of fat in the body. There's white fat, which is your standard subcutaneous fat. You have visceral fat, I mentioned at the beginning, and there's beige fat and brown fat. And beige fat can be turned into brown fat using certain types of exercise, like weight training and aerobic exercise. It turns out brown fat can actually burns calories for body warmth. So exercise can help convert that beige fat into brown fat, which will burn more calories and keep us leaner. Visceral fat inflames the body, so it's important to keep that to a very minimum. Men are more likely to put it on quicker when they age, as they get hormone changes. I've definitely noticed that. I'm 43 now, and I find it's very easy to put on visceral fat and very difficult to take it off. Like back in my 20s, I could hit that buffet line all the time. It was no problem. But so now it's a totally different story. Doctor says something interesting about sumo wrestlers and exercise. They studied sumo wrestlers, and everyone thinks they're obese, but everyone must think that, right? These guys are massive. But when you look at metabolically, they're actually quite healthy because they exercise 6 to 7 hours per day. And so they actually have very little visceral fat. Most of that fat is subcutaneous, which is not really dangerous for us. So a little interesting fact. Dr. Tara is recommending high interval training. That's where you go really hard and fast, basically till you're out of breath. Wait till you catch your breath and then go again for another cycle. Also, weight training is very good, strength training. And limiting stress the best you can is also important. There is an easy test to know if you have visceral fat. Lie down on the floor, and if your stomach goes flat, then it probably don't have a lot of visceral fat. But if you still have a paunch there, then that's pretty much guaranteed to be visceral fat. I guess the bad news is that we age, we're more and more likely to put on fat. And so the doctor was saying that one way to deal with that is exercise more as you get older. That doesn't sound very good. And she does mention the possibility of hormone replacement therapy that some people do. I don't know much about that, but something to consider. I talk a bit about the microbiome and how certain species of bacteria will consume more calories, i.e. less for you to store and put on body fat. Which really comes down to is that the doctor recommends eating more fibrous foods. So difficult to digest per se, and more of that bulkier food just goes out the old pooper and is not digested, and therefore it doesn't need to be stored as fat. And eating this way over time will shift your microbiome to one that is more associated with people that are lean. So Dr. Tara talks about what she does. And so she will have a light breakfast. She'll have a big salad for lunch and then a snack at around 3 to 4 o'clock. And then she is basically fasting from that time on overnight till the next morning. And she'll use high intensity training. Dr. Tara makes the point that her situation is a bit of an extreme because her body type, like her genome, causes her to really hold on to weight. So it really does depend on the individual, because some people, they have just the genetics. They really, really hold fat, where other people don't. Dr. Tara does stress the fact that we're all individuals. And one example I thought was interesting, a study on people in Israel, and some people can eat ice cream and chocolate and not get a blood sugar spike, where others do. So it's that blood sugar spike that's going to put the body into fat storage mode. So it's interesting. So if you're lucky, you can eat chocolate and not gain fat. Dr. Tara has a book out called The Secret Life of Fat. So if you're interested, go check that out. And it can help you dial down and figure out what the right diet is for your body type. And you can also find her work on Facebook and Twitter. That is Dr. Sylvia Tara. Now, the last podcast that I'm reviewing for this episode is from the Ben Greenfield Fitness podcast. And he interviews Dr. Joseph Mercola of Mercola.com. The title of the podcast is High Fat Fudge Balls, the best fruits for blood sugar, egg allergies, and more. This is a fairly technical podcast in that they talk about the minutia of body processes, stuff that you don't actually really need to know. And since it's the Health Stuff You Need to Know podcast, we can skip the minutia and get down to the stuff that you can actually use. The name of Dr. Mercola's book that he recently published is Fat for Fuel, and he recommends a ketogenic diet, or that you cycle in and out of ketosis, which is when your body is primarily burning fat as fuel. Now, the vast majority of people out there are not in a ketogenic state. They burn glucose as their primary fuel. And Dr. Mercola makes the point that when you do that, you create free radicals, which of course do damage to your body. Dr. Mercola's book is largely about mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of our cells, and how that when we do things that damage our mitochondria, it leads to all kinds of health problems, including cancer. They talk about how Dr. Mercola, when he was doing a strict ketogenic diet for a period of time and not cycling, how he got so thin. And I remember seeing him in a documentary recently, and he looked really, really thin. Like he looked gaunt even. So I'm glad to hear that he's changed his ways, because he was looking pretty thin and not that healthy. I personally do recommend the ketogenic diet for very particular applications. Weight loss is definitely one of them. If you got a bunch of extra weight you need to drop, a temporary run on a ketogenic diet can do that. No doubt about that. Also, I would think it's pretty good for if someone who has cancer, because most cancer cells require glucose to burn. Their mitochondria are so damaged, they can't burn fat or the ketones. And so yeah, why not starve those cancer cells out? At a minimum, you would think it would slow their growth. They talk a bit about cell phones and how they damage our mitochondria, and how it's best to keep your cell phone away from your body. I've done a fair amount of research on the cell phones, and absolutely, yeah, that radiation they emit is damaging to your body. So it's best to keep it away. I use my cell phone in speaker mode and do my very best to keep it away from my body, even when it's not using it, because your cell phone will still emit signals and communicate with the cell towers even when you're not making a call. Dr. Mercola recommends using a selfie stick that he uses for a cell phone, and that's kind of interesting. Ben mentions that he uses an air tube headset, which is available on the market, but Mercola says it doesn't actually work very well because he has a device to measure the radiation density. They also talk about iron and having too high of iron levels and how that can damage your mitochondria. And they do recommend getting a blood serum test to see where you're at. And if you're too high, Dr. Mercola recommended giving blood 2-3 times a year to get your iron levels down. And it's a great idea. It's good for you, and it's good for the people that need blood. Now, Dr. Mercola is a big fan of avocados, and so am I. And he recommends that you can buy, if you buy a bunch of avocados on sale, as long as you buy them rock hard and then put them in the fridge and take them out and have them sit on the counter for about 3 days before you eat them, it's a way to save money and ensure that you've always got a ripe avocado. Dr. Mercola spends a lot of time on the road, and he'll actually put avocados in a cardboard tube, like you would put maps in, and to travel with. So he puts them in green, and then when he's on the road, they ripen up, and then he's always got an avocado with him, and that's not bruised. So yeah, pretty slick little tip. They talk a little bit about glyphosate, which is a pesticide that is very common, that is quite destructive. It causes cancer, and it also destroys the gut lining. It's a major contributor to the rapid rise in leaky gut. So it is important to do your best to try and avoid glyphosate, and you can do that by buying organic, and you can also do that by eating off of the Clean 15 list, which is a list of fruits and vegetables that use the least amount of pesticides in their production. Dr. Mercola says that it is pretty safe to eat non-organic avocados because he's had them tested, and because you're peeling the skin off, you're not eating the skin of the avocado, you're not really getting any. So he tests his glyphosate levels. He actually has a test on his website that you can buy to test your glyphosate levels in your urine, and he is essentially zero. So he's doing very good at avoiding glyphosate. Another tip that Dr. Mercola recommends is not eating 3 hours before you go to bed. Because when you go to sleep, you go into rest and repair mode. And when you are digesting a bunch of food, it basically it creates reactive oxygen species, which impair your mitochondria. So to simplify it, so yeah, don't eat 3 hours before you go to bed. They also talk a bit about blue light. So there's a big issue out there with our new computer screens and our TVs and other devices. Our biology is very much set to the rhythms of the earth. And when the sun goes down, that signals our body to start producing melatonin and get us ready to go to sleep. But technology has changed our exposure to light, blue light in particular, and it messes with that hormone production. So people are getting less sleep or less quality of sleep as well. So one of the solutions is not to use tablets, computers, watch TV after sunset, so that's not really realistic for everybody, because myself included, I certainly do. So one of the solutions out there is a software program called Get Flux. And what it does is that after sunset, it will change the color on your screen to eliminate the blue that's causing the problem. It's free and easy to install. I have it on my computer. Now, for things like your TV that you can't do that with, he recommends wearing glasses that are designed to filter out the blue, green, yellow light. And there are some really pricey ones out there that are amber colored, but he recommends just going on Amazon and you can get safety glasses for lasers that are red, and they do the same job. And you can get them for a lot cheaper, between $9 and $20, so not much better than paying full price for the other ones. And he says that actually by protecting your eyes in this way, you will be able to avoid having to get reading glasses, because the vast majority of people have damage to their eyes and need reading glasses by the age of 50. Alrighty, well, that's my synopsis of that show. The podcast is Ben Greenfield Fitness. If you're interested, check that out. And the guest was Dr. Mercola, and drmercola.com. Get over there. He's got lots of great stuff. And he has his new book out, Fat for Fuel, that you might want to check out. So now this is the end of my first Listener Digest episode. I hope you like it. The whole intention is to take a bunch of useful information and compress it down. So it's essentially 3 hours worth of podcast condensed down to 30 minutes. So even more actionable, usable information for you guys. And I sincerely hope you like it and that you get some real value out of it. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. Head on over to healthstuffyouneedtoknow.com and hit the contact button, and you can shoot me an email. And I'd love to hear about what you think. We have reached the end of this episode. I hope you have found a piece of information you can use to improve your life or the life of your loved ones with. If you feel that I've helped you in some way, I ask that you help me in return. Liking, rating, reviewing, sharing, and or subscribing all help me rise in the search engine rankings so I can reach and help even more people. Subscribing being the most important one. Thanks in advance. As always, I will continue to bring you the health stuff you need to know.